Today's Take 5 with the Saints, April the 10th, is a very interesting figure in the English church of the 18th century, William Law, a cleric who was not allowed to be a cleric because of his role as a non-juror, one who would not swear allegiance to the Hanover monarchy, a high churchman who became an inspiration for the evangelical movement of the 18th century in the Church of England, and a man with a deep sense of liturgical and prayer piety who also became one of the most ardent advocates for a philosopher by the name of Isaac Newton. William Law is one who his writings, his sermons, and his personal piety and love for his fellow men were a great gift to the church of his day and today as well. Our scripture that goes with his feast day comes out of Matthew chapter 6, verses 1 through 6 and verses 16 through 21. Jesus said, "Beware of practicing your piety before others in order to be seen by them, for then you have no reward from your Father in heaven. So whenever you give alms, do not sound a trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, so that they may be praised by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward. But when you give alms, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your alms may be done in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And whenever you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and at the street corners, so that they may be seen by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward. But whenever you pray, go into your room and shut the door and pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And whenever you fast, do not look dismal like the hypocrites, for they disfigure their faces so as to show others that they are fasting. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward. But when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face, so that your fasting may be seen not by others, but by your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust consume, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust consumes, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." This reading sounds familiar from a liturgical context. It is the gospel we proclaim on Ash Wednesday, a day in which we are called to a life of personal piety and prayer as we go into the Lenten season. But it's also a reminder that that is what we should be doing even outside of Lent, obviously, is that life of personal piety and prayer. William Law, if he is known for one thing, and that's being not very fair because there were many things that he was known for during his time. But a book that I would, if you want to hear one of my things, here's something you should read, and yes, really do read this, is William Law's writing in 1728, his book called A Serious Call to a Devout and Holy Life, a book that impacted the trajectory of the church in England as well as the church in the American colonies during that period. And here is an excerpt from that book that speaks right to the heart of who William Law is and his contributions to the church. If we are to follow Christ, it must be in our common way of spending every day. If we are to live unto God at any time or in any place, we are to live unto him in all times and in all places. If we are to use anything as the gift of God, we are to use everything as his gift. Law was born in the late 17th century, and was trained up as a cleric in the Church of England and also as a teacher. But when the Hanover monarchy, with George I coming to power, we'll say around 1714, he was required, as any English clergyman was, to swear allegiance to the new monarchy, and for a variety of reasons, which we don't have time to go into here today, he elected not to and chose to be what was called a non-juror. And as such, his ability to practice as a parish priest in the Church of England was greatly curtailed, and ultimately was not able to do that. He remained a priest. He was never defrocked, but he could not carry out his ministry as a priest. And so he spent a lot of his time as a teacher, as a mentor, and as one who wrote sermons and books such as the one I just quoted from. But his writings had a great impact upon figures such as George Whitefield and John Wesley, two Anglican clergymen who went to the colonies and proclaimed an evangelical awakening, so to speak. George Whitefield's bringing a very low church or very non-sacramental emphasis to the Church of England in the colonies, and John Wesley, as you might know by his name, ultimately through him the Methodist Church came to fruition. But William Law himself was a man with a very high view of the sacraments and, ironically, a very high view of the monarchy. It was for that reason, part of which, why he did not swear to George I, because he did not see him as the true monarch who was head of the Church of England. But Law, nevertheless, continued in his writings and work to promote what he thought was the greatest call that any Christian must have, and that is simply to seek God in the daily activities of life in every way possible. His writings again combined this appreciation of the beauty of the Church's sacraments with this emphasis that became very popular with Whitefield, Wesley, and other evangelicals, with one's daily piety of reading the Bible, saying one's prayers, and engaging one's own individual connection with the words of the gospel. As I mentioned earlier, Law also became an advocate for some figures who were also faithful, but became some of the leading scientific figures. In particular, he was very fond of Isaac Newton and talked about how Newton helped us to understand through natural law that indeed there was a creator who continued to resonate with power, the effects upon the world that went for the salvation of humanity in all ways. But it should be stressed that Law also was one who defended the church, while Newton himself was not a deist, against those who followed Newton, who very much had this idea that God was simply this entity up in heaven that set the world in motion and just sort of left it alone. For William Law, each day was an opportunity to participate in the work that God was continuing to do in the lives of men and women. So, much more I can say about this very profoundly spiritual man, but again, if you would like to learn more about him, I can tell you right now, go and read A Serious Call to a Devout and Holy Life by William Law, and understand that that writing in particular was one that helped to shift the minds and hearts of many an Anglican clergy and layperson in the 18th century, and continues to resonate among many of us, including yours truly, in the Anglican Episcopal Communion here today. Thanks for joining me. Tomorrow, our saint of the day is George Augustus Selwyn, the Bishop of New Zealand. Take care, and we'll see you then.